I used to believe that the worst kind of betrayal came from people you barely knew. I thought strangers were the ones who could hurt you the most because they owed you nothing. It took me years to realize how wrong I was. The deepest wounds are always left by the people you trust without hesitation. I learned that lesson because of the woman I once called my best friend. Emily had been part of my life for almost 10 years. We met in college, and our friendship grew naturally. We celebrated birthdays together, supported each other through difficult times, and shared dreams about the future. She knew everything about me. She knew where I grew up, what my biggest fears were, which memories still made me smile, and which ones I preferred to forget. I never hid anything from her because I believed our friendship was built on complete honesty. When she announced that she was getting married, I was genuinely excited for her. She looked happier than I had ever seen her, and I wanted to help make every moment of her wedding unforgettable. After she asked me to become her maid of honor, I immediately accepted. I spent countless evenings helping her organize the ceremony, comparing decorations, discussing colors, searching for the perfect venue, and making sure every detail came together exactly as she imagined. I never questioned her intentions, because I had no reason to. Looking back now, I often wonder whether she invited me to be part of her wedding because she truly valued our friendship, or because keeping me close made everything easier for her. The first strange incident happened so casually that I barely thought about it. One morning, before work, I stopped at a small cafe that I had never visited before. As soon as I walked inside, the woman behind the counter smiled with surprising familiarity. She looked at me the way people look at regular customers they have known for years. Her expression carried warmth and recognition, while mine was filled with confusion. I assumed she had mistaken me for someone else, smiled politely, collected my coffee, and left without giving it much thought. For the rest of the day, I laughed at the situation. It seemed like one of those harmless misunderstandings that happen from time to time. People often resemble one another, and I convinced myself that I simply had a familiar face. Unfortunately, that explanation lasted only a few days. The following week, similar situations began happening almost everywhere I went. A cashier smiled at me as though we had spoken many times before. A woman walking her dog waved enthusiastically after recognizing me from what she believed had been a recent conversation. Even a receptionist in an office building greeted me with complete confidence, as if I had visited her several times already. Each encounter ended the same way. I walked away feeling slightly uncomfortable while trying to convince myself that coincidence was still a reasonable explanation. Then the details started becoming personal. People remembered stories about my childhood that I had never shared with them. They referred to hobbies I had never practiced and experiences I had never lived through. Some of the memories they mentioned sounded strangely familiar, yet I could not understand why. It felt as though someone had carefully mixed fragments of different lives together and attached my name to all of them. Instead of becoming frightened, I became curious. I started paying closer attention whenever someone recognized me. I listened carefully to every detail they mentioned, hoping to discover some logical explanation. At first, nothing connected. Every conversation seemed random, but little by little, a pattern slowly emerged. The stories people remembered did not belong to me. They belonged to Emily. One person believed I had recently completed a difficult hiking trail. Emily had shown me pictures from that exact trip months earlier. Another person remembered that I loved painting landscapes during weekends. Emily had taken painting classes for years, while I had never held a paintbrush outside of school. Someone else believed I had adopted a rescue dog. Emily had rescued a dog the previous year. The similarities were too specific to ignore. At first, I refused to let myself think about what that could possibly mean. Emily was my closest friend. There had to be another explanation. Maybe people simply confused both of us because we spent so much time together. Maybe she had mentioned me during conversations, causing people to mix up our identities. I desperately wanted to believe that. Then something happened that completely destroyed my confidence in those comforting explanations. During a weekend visit, my mother casually mentioned that she was happy I had finally found an apartment closer to the city center. The statement caught me completely off guard because I had never searched for another apartment. I had been living in the same place for almost 3 years and had no plans to move anywhere. My mother seemed surprised by my confusion. She clearly believed we had already discussed the subject before. She explained that she had recently spoken with me about the move and even remembered several details about the neighborhood. The problem was painfully simple. That conversation had never happened at first. I wondered whether she had confused me with another relative. As I gently asked more questions, she became certain that the conversation had been with me. She remembered my face, my voice, and even the way I smiled while describing my so-called new apartment. I felt an uncomfortable chill run through my entire body. Someone had convinced my own mother that they were me. For several minutes, I sat in complete silence after leaving her house. My thoughts raced in every direction, but none of them made sense. I kept replaying every strange encounter from the past few weeks. Suddenly, none of them felt random anymore. For the first time, I seriously considered the possibility that someone was intentionally presenting themselves as me. The idea sounded ridiculous. Who would do something like that? More importantly, why? I could not imagine any reason for another person to pretend to be me. I lived an ordinary life. I was not wealthy, famous, or influential. There was nothing extraordinary about my daily routine that anyone would want to steal. Still, the evidence continued growing. A few days later, while leaving work, I passed a bookstore where a woman suddenly greeted me with genuine excitement. She clearly expected me to recognize her, but I had never seen her before. She smiled with complete confidence, as though we had shared meaningful conversations in the past. Although I politely admitted that I did not remember meeting her, she seemed convinced that we knew each other well. Her certainty never faded. Instead, she reached for her phone, intending to remind me where we had met, for only a brief second. Before she lowered the screen again, I caught a glimpse of the profile picture, connected to our supposed conversation. The photograph was unmistakably mine. It was one of my own pictures. My heart started beating faster. I barely managed to remain calm until I walked away. That single moment changed everything. No longer could I explain the situation as mistaken identity or coincidence. Someone had been using my photograph while interacting with people I had never met. That evening, I checked every social media account I owned. Every password remained unchanged. Nothing appeared suspicious. No unfamiliar devices had accessed my accounts, and there were no signs that anyone had stolen my profiles. The mystery only became deeper. If nobody had hacked my accounts, how were complete strangers recognizing my face? I barely slept that night, lying awake in the darkness. I kept thinking about every detail I had ignored over the previous weeks. Small events that once seemed meaningless suddenly felt connected. Every strange greeting, every familiar smile, every conversation that never happened. They no longer looked like isolated incidents. They were pieces of the same puzzle. By sunrise, I had made a decision. I would stop dismissing my instincts. Instead of waiting for another strange encounter, I would quietly begin looking for the truth myself. At that moment, I still had no idea that the person I trusted more than anyone else was about to become the center of every answer I was searching for. The following morning, I left home with a completely different mindset. Instead of trying to ignore what had been happening, I decided to observe everything carefully. Every unfamiliar smile, every strange look of recognition, and every unexpected comment suddenly became important. I felt as if I had stepped into someone else's life without understanding how it had happened. For several days, nothing unusual happened. I almost convinced myself that I had been imagining the entire situation. I even started feeling guilty for allowing my thoughts to drift toward Emily. She had been my closest friend for years, and accusing her even silently felt unfair. I reminded myself how many memories we had shared and how many difficult moments we had survived together. I wanted to believe that my growing suspicion was nothing more than fear, looking for someone to blame. Then another unexpected moment changed everything. While organizing some documents at work, one of my coworkers casually mentioned a conversation we had supposedly had a few weeks earlier. According to her memory, I had spoken confidently about changing careers and moving into a completely different industry. The story sounded detailed and convincing, yet I had absolutely no memory of it, because it had never happened. What disturbed me even more was the confidence with which she remembered that conversation. She described my expressions, my enthusiasm, and even the way I had laughed while talking about my future plans. Listening to her felt surreal because she was describing someone who looked exactly like me but behaved like a completely different person. For the first time, I realized that whoever had been pretending to be me had studied me carefully. They knew how I smiled, how I moved, and how I spoke. They knew enough to convince people who already knew me. That realization frightened me more than anything else. I began reviewing old photographs on my phone. I wasn't looking for memories anymore. I was looking for patterns. Emily appeared almost everywhere: birthday dinners, weekend trips, holiday celebrations, family gatherings, office parties. She had slowly become part of every area of my life. She knew my coworkers because she had attended company events with me. She knew my relatives because she had celebrated holidays with my family. She knew my favorite places because we had spent years exploring them together. The more I looked through those photographs, the more uncomfortable I became. She knew enough about my life to recreate it. That thought refused to leave my mind. Instead of confronting her, I decided to quietly collect information. I didn't want to accuse someone without proof, especially someone I had trusted for almost a decade. If I was wrong, I would destroy the most important friendship of my life. I started paying attention whenever Emily talked about people I had never met. Occasionally, she mentioned conversations with strangers who somehow seemed to know far more about me than they should have. At the time, I had considered those stories meaningless. But now every detail sounded different. I also noticed another strange habit. Whenever I talked about an important event in my life, Emily remembered every tiny detail with remarkable precision. At first, I had considered that a sign of genuine friendship. Now I wondered whether she had simply been collecting information. Every conversation we had shared over the years suddenly looked different. Every secret I had trusted her with suddenly felt dangerous. One evening, while scrolling through social media, I noticed something unusual. Several people had tagged Emily in photographs from places she had never mentioned visiting. Curious, I opened the pictures. At first, nothing seemed strange. Then I froze. One photograph showed Emily standing with a small group of people I had never seen before. They were smiling naturally, as if they had known each other for years. The caption underneath the picture immediately caught my attention. It included my name, not Emily's, mine. I stared at the screen, hoping I had misunderstood. I hadn't. Someone in the comments thanked me for organizing the gathering. Another person wrote about how kind I had always been. Every single comment referred to Emily as though she were me. My hands started shaking. I clicked through the profiles of the people leaving those comments. None of them had any connection to my actual life. They lived in another part of the city. They worked in different industries. They belonged to completely different social circles, yet every one of them believed they knew me, not Emily, me. I couldn't stop wondering how long this had been happening. Weeks, months, years? The possibility that it had continued unnoticed for years made me feel physically sick. Suddenly, I remembered something Emily used to say whenever we met new people together. She always joked that we were so alike that people could easily confuse us. I had always laughed. Now those words echoed inside my mind with an entirely different meaning. Over the next several days, I quietly continued watching without saying anything. Emily behaved exactly as she always had. She laughed naturally. She talked about wedding plans. She thanked me for helping her. Nothing about her behavior suggested guilt. If she was hiding something, she had become incredibly skilled at pretending everything was normal. The closer her wedding became, the more uncomfortable I felt. I no longer knew whether I was helping my best friend prepare for the happiest day of her life or helping someone who had quietly stolen pieces of mine. One afternoon, I finally received the first piece of undeniable evidence. It happened completely by accident. Emily had asked me to pick up several printed invitations from a local print shop because she was busy meeting another wedding vendor. I happily agreed, since I was already nearby. While waiting for the invitations, an employee behind the counter smiled warmly after recognizing me. Instead of speaking much, he immediately walked toward a shelf and returned with a small folder. Inside were several design drafts. At first I thought they were different versions of the wedding invitations. They weren't. They contained personal branding, materials, business cards, event invitations, holiday greeting cards. Every single design included my full name, my address, my email, my photograph, but none of them had ever been created by me. The employee casually explained that I had visited the shop several times over the previous year to order similar materials. My entire body went cold. I had never entered that building before. Someone else had. Someone using my identity. I managed to remain calm long enough to collect the wedding invitations and leave. Only after reaching my car did I allow myself to breathe again. I sat behind the steering wheel for nearly 20 minutes, staring at the folder I had secretly photographed. Before returning it, the evidence was finally real. This was no misunderstanding. Someone had deliberately built another version of my life. Someone had introduced themselves to strangers using my name, my face, and my personal information for the first time. I stopped asking whether Emily was involved. Instead, I started asking one terrifying question: if she really was behind everything, how much of my life actually belonged to me anymore? That night, I realized I could no longer ignore the truth. For weeks, I had hoped that every strange event would eventually make sense on its own. Instead, every new discovery only confirmed that someone had been quietly building another version of my life while I remained completely unaware. I knew I had to stop relying on assumptions if I wanted answers. I needed proof. Over the next several days, I paid closer attention than ever before. I carefully observed Emily whenever we attended wedding appointments together. I noticed how naturally she introduced herself to new people, how confidently she shared personal stories, and how easily she adapted her behavior depending on who she was talking to. Then I started recognizing something that I had ignored for years. Many of the stories she told about herself had originally been my stories, small childhood memories, funny moments from school, embarrassing situations I had trusted only a few close people with. Travel experiences, career achievements. First, she had probably repeated them by accident after hearing them so many times, but somewhere along the way, those memories had slowly become part of her own identity. The more I thought about it, the more painful the realization became. She hadn't only borrowed my experiences, she had been replacing me with herself. I suddenly remembered countless moments that had once seemed harmless. Whenever we met someone new together, Emily usually answered questions before I had the chance. She often told stories about me, but gradually those stories became less about introducing me and more about placing herself at the center of every conversation. I had always assumed she was simply outgoing. Now, I saw those memories differently. For years, I had unknowingly stepped aside while someone else slowly occupied my place. Instead of confronting her immediately, I made one final decision. I wanted complete certainty. A few days before the wedding, I quietly contacted several people whose names I had discovered through social media. I never accused anyone of anything. I simply introduced myself and explained that I believed there had been a misunderstanding. The conversations were heartbreaking. Every single person believed they already knew me. They recognized my face. They recognized my name. But the personality they described wasn't mine. They remembered someone more adventurous, someone who loved activities I had never tried, someone with different ambitions, different habits, and different memories. Little by little, I realized they weren't describing me at all. They were describing Emily, only they believed Emily had always been me. Listening to those stories felt like hearing someone read a biography, written with my name, but another person's life. For a while, I blamed myself. Maybe I had trusted too easily. Maybe I had shared too much. Maybe I had ignored warning signs because I wanted to believe that loyalty always existed between true friends. Eventually, I stopped blaming myself. Trust is never a mistake. Betraying that trust is. The wedding arrived. People expected it to be one of the happiest days of Emily's life. For me, it became the day I finally accepted reality. I attended the ceremony because disappearing without explanation would have left many unanswered questions. I smiled politely. I congratulated the newly married couple. I fulfilled every responsibility I had promised months earlier, but inside, everything had already changed. While watching the celebration, I realized something important. The person I had spent years trying to protect had never protected me. The friendship I believed we shared had existed only because I had been honest, while someone else had been collecting pieces of my life. I quietly left the reception earlier than anyone expected. There was no dramatic confrontation. No public accusations. No scene that would become another story people would remember incorrectly. Instead, I chose silence. The following morning, I removed Emily from every part of my life. I blocked her number. I removed every connection we shared online. I informed my family that I no longer wished to have any contact with her. When friends asked what had happened, I never spoke with anger. I simply explained that some betrayals cannot be repaired once trust disappears. Several weeks passed before Emily finally realized I was never coming back. She attempted to contact me through mutual friends' emails and handwritten letters. I never answered, not because I wanted revenge, because I had finally learned that peace sometimes begins with refusing to reopen a closed door. Months later, I unexpectedly met one of the people who had previously mistaken Emily for me. This time, I calmly explained the truth. The conversation ended with genuine surprise and sincere apologies. For the first time, someone finally knew my real story. That moment felt strangely healing. I slowly began reconnecting with people who had unknowingly met a version of me that had never existed. Some relationships grew naturally, others quietly disappeared. I accepted both outcomes because I finally understood that I could not control other people's memories. I could only protect my future. Today, I often think about how easily trust can blind us. The people closest to us usually know enough to either support us or destroy us. The difference lies entirely in the choices they make. Emily made hers, eventually. I made mine. I chose honesty over revenge. I chose distance over endless arguments. Most importantly, I chose to rebuild my own identity instead of fighting over the false one someone else had created. Losing my closest friend was one of the most painful experiences of my life, but losing the illusion that everyone deserves unlimited trust became one of the most valuable lessons I have ever learned. Looking back now, I no longer see this story as one about betrayal. I see it as a story about reclaiming my own life. No one can truly steal your identity forever if you have the courage to stand in your own truth. It took me a long time to understand that, but once I did, I finally felt like myself again, and that was something no one could ever take away from me.